On April 8th, 1983, David Cooperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear. I'm going to demonstrate that here now with a postcard of the Statue of Liberty. There's a picture of the Statue of Liberty on a postcard. Now what happened is he had the audience, this was done on national TV, you can actually pull it up off YouTube. He had the audience sitting in front of the Statue of Liberty. He had a big curtain that was tall enough to cover the statue, and when the curtain went up, and then bam, when it came back down, the statue just vanished, just like that. Now, as amazing as that was to make the Statue of Liberty disappear, there was another magician many years earlier who made that look like child's play. His name was Jasper Maskelyne. His great-grandfather, his great-grandfather, John Neville Maskelyne, created the illusion that Houdini did, called metamorphosis, or a substitution truck. There'd be a box. Houdini would be locked up in the box. His assistant would be standing on top of the box. Then a curtain would momentarily cover her, and then just like the Statue of Liberty, you saw it disappear. In this case, they would switch places, bam, just like that, where Houdini would be standing on the box, and then his assistant would be inside the box, locked up. Now, Maskelyne, he was an officer in the British Army during World War II. I'm going to be reading his story out of this book. It's called The War Magician. Its cover is a little bit dinged. The War Magician by David Fisher. I'm going to go ahead and read the introduction, because he has to have a history of magic. Introduction's pretty interesting. During the 16th century, it is said a stocky English farmer named John Maskelyne served the, I don't know if I pronounce this right, Cheltenham district as Justice of the Peace. He was called one day to preside at the trial of a stranger, a small, twisted black man who had appeared mysteriously in the district, clad in an unusual black silk suit, called by the name Drummer of Tedworth. I can't even read. He stood accused of the practice of black magic. The evidence given against him was such that John Maskelyne declared him guilty of witchcraft and banished him to the American plantation. Well, at least they didn't kill him or burn him at the stake, right? Soon thereafter, great misfortune befell the Maskelyne farm. Crops inexplicably failed. Cattle became bloated and died. A barn fire destroyed the sparse corn harvest. And at night, on the darkest eve, a little black man was seen limping about the fields. Suddenly, however, the farm once more blossomed. Crops grew high and straight in the fields. The cattle were fat with milk. During a local famine, the Maskelyne barn alone burst with corn, and soon the farmer's pockets clinked with gold coins. So the tale was told throughout the land that farmer John Maskelyne had purchased at the price of his own mortal soul the powers of black magic for himself and 10 generations of his descendants. Through the years that followed, the Maskelyne family did indeed seem to possess extraordinary powers. The line is ripe with scientists, magicians, and men of standing. Neville Maskelyne, of the 3rd generation, served as royal astronomer to the court of King George III. He was the first to measure time to tenths of a second, to figure the weight of the earth, and he made great discoveries about the movement of stars in the heavens. About Peter Maskelyne, the 5th generation, it was said he practiced alchemy. Upon his death, his notebooks were burned in a public bonfire, and the flames were supposedly many and unusual colors. In the English generation came, in the 8th generation, English generation? Well, this is England. In the 8th generation came John Neville Maskelyne, a remarkable inventor, and the man considered to be the father of modern magic. He created the famed box trick, Again, the metamorphosis trick I mentioned earlier, in which two people seemingly change places in an instant. Learned to fly from the stage to a perch on a crystal chandelier, and was able to cause full-bodied spirits to materialize from his own body and converse. He founded the elite magicians organization, the Magic Circle, and presented the first edition of Maskelyne's Magic Mysteries at London's famed Egyptian Theatre. He also perfected the standard typewriter keyboard and invented Psycho, the marvel of the 1870s, a mechanical man who played flawless whist, and that is currently on display in the British Museum. The 10th generation was Jasper Maskelyne, the War magician. To him would fall the greatest challenge of all, to pit the powers of magic against the most evil foe in history. And at the end of the Titanic battle, he would have added the strangest and most significant page to the family legends. Now, as you can see, Jasper actually carried on the family business as a magician, a performer. But he, like Houdini, he even did some acting. Let me turn to this page here. Playing as a detective, he used magic tricks to solve crimes. It says here, his good looks and the sophisticated presence that enabled him to charm skeptical patrons into believing that a simple sight was a feat of great difficulty made him a natural for the talking pictures. And he made a series of them, starring as a detective who used magic to solve crimes. But when the world mobilized for war in 1939, he put show business aside and began conceiving of means to adapt the techniques of stage magic to the battlefield. He firmly believed, as he had been taught by his grandfather, that with imagination and knowledge anything was possible. The prospect of military service thrilled him. Although his fame had spread throughout Europe, he had spent much of his life feeling as if he were a character cast into someone else's play. As a Maskelyne, his life had been carefully planned for him, and he had diligently followed that plan. The war represented a chance to finally step out of the historic shadows cast by his grandfather and father. The Maskelyne name would have no meaning on the battlefield. Family contracts could not deflect Nazi bullets. The carpenters in the workshop could not create illusions for him. He would be on his own, dependent entirely upon his own skills. And we can jump down here. He admitted he was too old to leap from the trenches into no man's land, and acknowledged that he occasionally suffered from motion sickness. But he says, if I can stand in the focus of powerful footlights and deceive an audience only the width of an orchestra pit away, I can certainly deceive German observers 15,000 feet in the air or miles away on land. But as desperately as he fought to get a commission, so did the army seem desperate to keep him out, as if there were some shame in allowing a music hall performer to partake in the serious killing business. It was proving easier for him to levitate an entire chorus in mid-verse than convince a single ranking officer that his concepts had merit. Now eventually, though, he did receive a letter from the army. Where was it here? Three days later, a buff envelope was hand-delivered ordering him to report to the Royal Engineers Camouflage Training and Development Center at Farnham. But his wife, Mary, asks, "Camouflage?" "Hiding things," he explained, and then she nodded. "Oh, perfect." So I think, what does that mean? Then he reported to Farnham Castle that Jasper Maskelyne came to learn how to march correctly, stand at rigid attention, salute properly, and create illusions that might fool the greatest conquering army in history. Okay, now they assembled, the first class of the Royal Engineers Camouflage Training and Development Center assembled at Farnham Castle on October 14th. There were 30 men exchanged their civilian clothes for natty Austin Reed uniforms and the Sam Brown chest belts. They raised their right hands and swore to defend the crown, the Constitution, and the country. They stood around sipping tea, adjusting their starched uniforms, and trying to sound as military astute as possible. Basically, this consisted of punctuating every few sentences with a crisp, "Damn, Jerry's!" All right. Now there was a Major Buckley was the one who was in charge of this. During the Great War, Buckley had served as a camouflage officer under somebody named Solomon, the painter who literally wrote the book. He was a painter, and he literally wrote the book on wartime camouflage. It was not a very thick book, though, a very thin book, as it says here. So there was pretty much a motley crew of people here. There were basically sculptors, a sculptor, a zoologist, a circus manager, and of course Jasper the magician. Now after his training, though, Jasper was afraid his talents would be going to waste, so he concocted a plan to make the army take notice. And that's here on page 21. So he says, we're going to do something so startling at Lord Gort's inspection next week that they can't possibly overlook us. So he's talking about Frank here, one of his teammates. Going, us, he mumbled weakly. So on a Gothic morning in mid-December, John Standish, Surtees, I can't pronounce the name, Prendergast Vereker, even the 6th Viscount Gort, or simply Lord Gort, Inspector General of the Army, stood at the edge of a rolling field with his aides and a very nervous Buckley. There was Crisp, and of course remember Buckley, he's the one that trained them at Farnham Castle. Is that what it is? Farnham, yeah, Farnham Castle. At your pleasure, sir, Buckley said smartly. Then Gort nodded. To demonstrate their skills, teams of camouflage officers had to have been assigned a weapon vehicle or fortification to conceal. The commander-in-chief was to walk the field and attempt to uncover these efforts. Maskelyne and Knox was another guy that he was working with here, had been given a machine gun bunker to hide. Jasper attacked the project with relish, as if he were creating a show-stopping illusion for St. George's Hall. He carefully sketched every detail. Then once the various pieces were fashioned and put in place, each of them was tested and retested until there existed virtually no chance for error. While their classmates packed it in at dusk, Jasper and Frank worked into the freezing night on details Knox was certain no one would ever notice. When it finally got too cold, they would return to the castle, and Maskelyne would work on the scale model battleship that would enable him to turn an ordinary machine gunner's nest into a magic theater. They finished the night before the inspection, and the next morning they lay flat on their stomachs inside the cramped position as Lord Gort began his first tour of the field. Gort immediately spotted the dummy tank, disguised as a 3-ton truck, the papier-mâché 25-pounder poorly silhouetted against the bleak horizon, 2 snipers' trees, and a number of bunkers covered with garnished netting. So these were some other people that had set up some camouflaged as well. Footprints in the soft earth led him to 4 broom-armed riflemen laying under dirt-encrusted canvas. Inside the bunker, Maskelyne tensed each time Gort so much as sniffed in his direction, as if the outcome of the war depended upon the generals being fooled. Eventually, Lord Gort managed to ferret out every piece and position except number 4, the Maskelyne Knox machine gun nest. The general regarded the exercise as a game, but he was a serious gamesman. Don't tell me where it is, he snapped, and began stalking through the field for the third time. He failed to find the bunker. Turning to Buckley, he asked in a tiny cloudburst of cold breath, "All right, Major, where is it?" The answer came from a hump of earth no more than 30 feet away. "Here we are, sir," a muffled voice shouted. Gort squinted at the gentle rise and began walking toward it, but stopped when he spotted a narrow rectangular slit almost completely hidden beneath overhanging clumps of field grass. A broomstick handle popped out. "This is a machine gun," the voice yelled playfully. Bang! Buckley winced. Machine gun nest had been made by laying sheets of plywood over a natural depression, then covering the plywood with dirt and grass so that it blended into the field. Regularly cut pieces of mirror had been placed in front of the bunker to reflect the ground in front of it, and the false tire tracks, supposedly made by the dummy truck that was parked nearby, passed directly over the mound and added to the impression that it was a natural feature of the field. Now, to say the least, this impressed him. So, okay, now he's in. Now he's going to be part of the Army now. And now this is Knox talking to him right here. I believe this was Lord Hood. By the time Lord Hood Lord Hood will be saying that it was a trick, wasn't it? Jasper's eyes twinkled. "What did you expect, sir? Magic?" The purpose of the demonstration was not lost on the general. Later, as the class feasted on prime ribs, and Yorkshire pudding at Farmhill Castle, the quizzed Maskelyne on the real potential of magic on the battlefield. "That was a nice show, and I shan't soon forget it, but conditions in the field are quite different. It's not a stage, and the audience won't be sitting still. And I'm not going to be sawing women in half and making pianos disappear," Jasper responded. "General, I don't intend to do hocus pocus. What I mean to do is apply the same principles used in stage magic to the battlefield." So then he kind of got their attention now. So now he's going to be sent off to North Africa, to where the war was in the Middle East. But his first assignment wouldn't have him pitting his skill against the Germans, but rather another adversary. British needed safe passage through Arab lands should a retreat be necessary, but unfortunately that would ignite another war with the Arabs. So Colonel Beasley, Deputy Director of Operations, discussed the matter with Jasper. That's on page 35. It starts over here. They're discussing this over tea. Now, he's already traveled on the boat across the water. He's already in the Middle East. He's already in North Africa, in the desert of North Africa. And then he's talking about his very first assignment, military assignment. Over tea and cakes, and this was, again, what was that guy? Beasley, Deputy Director of Operations Beasley is talking with him over tea and cakes. So we outline the situation. The Imam of the Whirling Dilvers tribe, an aged and revered leader, revered leader, had threatened to declare a jihad, a holy war, if one British soldier set foot on dervish territory. This was a serious problem. The Imam was a god to his well-armed people, and if he was harmed in any way, his fanatical followers would carry out his declaration. But if he was not convinced to withdraw this threat, the evacuation column would soon come under murderous Arab fire. So then Jasper's listening right here carefully. He did not immediately understand how his magic could solve this problem. The Imam claims to possess true magical powers, the colonel continued. So we thought perhaps you could go see him and convince him to be a good fellow. One magician to another, that sort of thing, you know. Officer, or not officer, offer him some trinkets if necessary. These people like the shiny things. You know, shiny jingles and things. Well, what do you think? Can you help him? Or help us? Maskelyne hesitated. The magic of the religious leaders of the Middle East was thousands of years old. With it they had controlled civilization. His puny stage tricks could not be compared with it. The Imam would hardly be impressed by the endless silks when his chance could move a stone wall, but Jasper knew he had no choice. The army was finally going to give an opportunity to prove his ability, and he could not turn it down now. Taking a deep breath, he replied, I can't promise anything. So then he goes off, and it's kind of an interesting situation with the story. He ends up, this kid ends up begging for money, and so he doesn't, you know, he's basically told, you know, not to engage with the child. So he goes off on his own. This child's following him. Comes to find out he's actually the driver. So he says, I'm going to take you to the Imam. So he's like driving him over to the Imam. And then he meets the interpreter. And so, so this whole situation is pretty funny, pretty interesting. It makes me think of like when you got, like in the old West days, when you got the two cowboys and they got their 6-shooters on their side and they're going to have a shootout in the middle of the street. You know, one magician to another to see who's the best. And one of the tricks that Jasper does is, I'm going to show you right here. Put this book away. He takes a silk out of his pocket, and then he takes and he puts the silk into his hand like this. And then he's able to turn it into a butterfly, but I'm just going to make it disappear like that. But he turns it into a butterfly. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to that page right now. Let's see. Whoa, where'd that come from? I want to read about his situation with the Imam. Now Jasper politely refused the hashish. Now, the Imam's, he lights up some hashish to smoke, and Jasper has his own pipe that he likes to smoke instead. So he politely refused the hashish, instead lighting his own briar pipe. But why is he against us? And he's talking to his interpreter. Hassan shrugged. Hassan is the interpreter. Perhaps some slight of many years ago that he has never forgotten. His motive is not important, as you English say. The gun is often fired without reason. Is it possible the Germans are paying him? Yes, but not with gold. He has all the wealth he will ever need. If they are whispering in his ear, it is perhaps promises of authority when the war is finished. Maskelyne shook his head in bewilderment. How do I deal with a man like that? So Prince Hassan, he's the one that's interpreting for him. Oh, he's the one smoking. Yeah, dragged deeply on his pipe and savored the smoke before replying. Now we're going to probably jump, maybe I need to jump a little ahead here. Let's see here. Might be behind. Where are we at here? Oh yeah, a short time later a servant entered and announced that the Imam had awakened and was prepared to see the visitor. So we're going to go back here a bit ways here. Where are we at here? Oh, here we go. This is where they got the magic showdown here. Again, they're trying to negotiate being able to allow him to have troops British troops' withdrawal through his lands. And of course, he's not a real fan of the British. He talks right his poor while they're talking here. He's ask him if there's some way my people can show their appreciation for his generosity and understanding. What am I doing here? Yeah, so surely there must be some compromise. Jasper responded when they had finished and asked him if there was some way my people can show their appreciation for his generosity and understanding. So then the wizened old man listened patiently, then suddenly launched into a bitter anti-British tirade, speaking so rapidly that all the servant could do was summarize. He does not like the British at all, he explained. So I gather, ask him why. So ignoring the question, the Imam continued spewing threats as the courtyard fountain splashed water. The Imam says, your problems with the Germans and the Italians do not concern him. He says that if one English soldier marches on sacred Arab soil, he will declare a jihad. Jasper began explaining that the proposed withdrawal, which probably would never be necessary, posed no danger to the Arab people, whom the British respected as brothers. However, he repeated, my government is prepared to show its respect. The Imam suddenly ended the discussion by moving spryly to the clay planter. Positioning himself directly in front of it, he began waving his arms. Now here's the first show off here, what he's going to do here, his first magic trick, and chanting. Maskelyne watched with fascination. After a bit, the old man stepped aside. A shriveled but blossoming miniature orange tree had sprouted in the pot. Jasper had seen the trick done before, and better. This is more an example of how to hide a tiny tree up the sleeve of a blouse than a demonstration of divinely inspired magic. In response, he casually took his pipe from his pocket, snapped his fingers into flame, and lit it. If this was the best this faker could do, he thought he could certainly match him. The Imam's green eyes seethed with anger, and he wasn't real happy. Holding open his hands to show they were empty, he placed them over his eyes. Then very deliberately he pulled them away. An egg had materialized in each hand. He stared at the eggs as if to crack them open with the intensity of his glare, then abruptly smacked them together. A dove sat in his cupped hands. He tossed it into the air, and it fluttered onto a ceiling beam. Now this is where Jasper produces the butterfly. Jasper is feeling quite confident the Imam would barely make the bill at St. George's Hall with these basic sleights. Then in response to the dove production, he pulled a multicolored handkerchief out of his pants pockets. He swirled it about freely, then poked it into his clenched fist. An instant later, he opened his hand, and a butterfly of the kerchief colors flew out of the door, disappearing down the hallway. Of course, the Imam, he ends up, I'll show you that. I'll up one here. The Imam responded by elevating a small vase from the top of the cabinet. Then Maskelyne produced a flow of trinkets from his mouth. The Imam faced the cabinet and held out a beckoning hand. Slowly he drew his hand to his body, and as he did, the door creaked open as if being pulled by a string. So here we got this show off here, like, one magician doing his thing, the other one doing his thing. That's one trying to up the other, trying to show who's better. So then Maskelyne, after a display of different magic tricks between the two of them, he ends up scaring the Imam right here. At this point, so we're going to skip down to here where he reached under his shirt and pulled out his prop pistol. The Imam misunderstood and began backing away fearfully. No, it's all right, Jasper said. But the old man didn't seem to understand. His eyes began to bulge as he stared at the gun. Just as the Imam opened his mouth to shout for his guards, Maskelyne wisely turned the barrel of the gun on himself. The dervish leader relaxed, but maintained his distance and watched cautiously. Maskelyne took 6 blank cartridges from his bush jacket pocket and loaded the gun. Then he raised his open left hand, held the gun in his right hand about 8 inches, something like this. From the center of his palm, took a deep breath, closed his eyes, grimaced, and fired. The translator fell onto his knees and began praying. Jasper held out his left hand for inspection. Apart from a nasty red welt in the center of his palm, there seemed to be no damage. The bullet appeared to have passed right through it. The Imam moved toward the wall, but Maskelyne beat him to the spot and made an exaggerated show of prying the planted bullet out of the plaster, holding it out to the Imam for inspection. He had planted that bullet earlier while under distraction. He said, "A souvenir of my performance, perhaps." Now what's funny is the Imam is really getting kind of like, frustrated with him at this point. So he does something really, seems like out of desperation. He goes and picks up this long steel lance and held it above his head. Then he closed his eyes and began an almost hypnotic, monotonic chant. When he finished, he opened his eyes and glared at Maskelyne. Without taking his eyes off the frustrated magician, he lowered the lance and turned it, placing its sharpened spike against his stomach. Then his gaze softened as if in pity for the white man's innocence. In that instant, his intention became horrifyingly clear. He actually looked like he stabbed himself with the sword. "No!" Jasper screamed and dived to stop him. The spear butt rammed into the wall, driving the spike deep into the old man's fragile body. He groaned and skewed on the lance as if ripped through his stomach, as it ripped through his stomach. The point of the spike tore through the back of his sateen shirt. Jasper was paralyzed, his hands frozen in midair. The servant fell to his knees, crying. Now, this point almost seems like he just lost the battle with this Imam, this sorcerer, this magician. But let's skip ahead here. He ends up remembering that this trick was actually done before. He didn't realize he was actually fooled this time by this guy. So it's like in something he had once heard about, another story told by his grandfather. The details were sketchy, but he remembered bits of it. A turn-of-the-century music hall performer claiming to be a desert marabout had achieved some success with a similar illusion in the outer cities, but had been exposed as a fraud in London, something about a leather belt. The Imam held his hand over his wound and triumphantly lectured Maskelyne. Jasper obediently held out the spear to the dervish leader, and as the old man accepted it, he casually brushed the Imam's side. The old man jumped back as if he had been touched by the hand of the devil. It was too late. Jasper had felt something much too firm to be flesh. It was a music hall trick, after all. It had been performed to perfection, and given the setup, it was entirely believable, but it was nothing more than an old variety turn. After all his years on the stage, after countless performances, he had fallen for it. He bit down hard on his lip to keep himself from laughing out loud at his foolishness. So again, then the Maskelyne, he ignored, the Imam's chattering, he's chattering on, rattled on. Maskelyne ignored the chatter, trying to decide what to do next. He couldn't do better than the spear bit, not with the props on hand, but he knew that there was much more to a good act than the illusion. There was the bluff. Turning to the servant, he ordered, "Tell the Imam I am not impressed by his silly tricks." The servant's mouth fell open. "I cannot," he pleaded. "Please, Tell him, or I will tell the prince you have disobeyed me." The terrified man stared at the floor as he translated Maskelyne's insult. When he finished, he cringed as if expecting to be struck down by the wrath of the great wizard. The Imam's eyes boiled with hatred, and he hurled curses at Maskelyne. Maskelyne folded his arms defiantly and stood his ground. Then he loudly commanded, "Tell him I know he is wearing a leather channel around his waist. Tell him I know the lance will bend around his belt." The servant was only a few words into his explanation when the Imam stopped him. Like winter mellowing into spring, then summer, his glare softened into a stare, then a gaze. He replied in a voice soft and respectful. The astonished interpreter stuttered through the Imam's surrender. He says, "You are a man of great magic." Jasper nodded appreciatively. He says, "You have passed the test. That you too belong to a higher circle." Yeah, right. Jasper knew he had him. The old scallywag couldn't risk being exposed as a fraud to his people if they discovered that his powers were based upon chicanery. So this was his first real success as the war magician in accomplishing something for the British Army. Now they'll be able to retreat through British lands and not be challenged by the Imam and his followers. So that ends this reading here. Well, next reading we're going to talk about one of his greatest illusions he did against the German military. Like his father, or his grandfather, John Neville Maskelyne, who created a substitution trunk where a man and a woman would magically switch places, he would cause an entire harbor to switch places. We'll talk about that later. We'll go to that chapter and read. So thank you for listening.